How's it going, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Thinking Blue podcast. I'm your host, Blake Harris. Now, I'm trying to think back to when the last time I did an episode was. I want to say it was like mid to end May, maybe early June, so it's been some time since I recorded a podcast, just been insanely busy. Some things have just gotten in the way over the course of the last 6 to 8 weeks, however long it's been, so we're going to try to bring this back on a week-to-week basis, maybe 2 episodes a week, but at the very least, I want to get back to doing at least 1 episode per week. So for today's episode, we're not going to be recapping everything that's happened since I recorded my last podcast, because there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in regards to the Dodgers. So today's episode is going to be entirely a Q&A, which is honestly one of my favorite things to do because you guys ask a lot of great questions. So today's episode, I turned to Twitter about an hour ago. I asked for you guys to submit any Dodgers questions you have, any trade deadline questions you have. So we had a lot of replies. So unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to get to all of them just because I don't want this to be an hour-long episode. So if I don't get to your question, I apologize. If you're listening to this and you'd like me to answer your question in a future episode, follow me on Twitter at Blake Harris TBLA. Turn on those notifications whenever I record an episode about an hour before. I ask you guys to hit me up with any Dodgers questions you have, and at the end of every episode, I like to do some sort of Q&A. So again, for everyone that asked a question, I really appreciate it. Again, if you haven't done so already, make sure to follow me on Twitter at Blake Harris TBLA. So without further ado, why don't we just get into the questions that you guys have for me this week. All right, our first question comes from at Slugison35. Hopefully I said that right. Can we get Will Smith and Keibert Ruiz to learn another position? I know we're probably getting the DH, but another position for each would help a lot with the lineup roster construction in the near future. I'm pretty sure Willie played some third base somewhat recently. Yeah, so Will Smith actually, I believe, played a good amount of third base in the minor leagues. I don't think he was that good defensively. I know the Dodgers attempted it a year ago or this year at some point, and I think Will Smith actually had an error, so maybe down the line try to move Will Smith to third base, get some reps at first base. Keibert Ruiz, I believe, has only ever played catcher, so I don't think moving him anywhere is going to be likely. However, if I remember correctly, when Keibert was up with the Dodgers about a month or two ago, I think he said he's willing to take reps in the outfield so that way he's able to get some playing time elsewhere or maybe even some reps at first base. So eventually down the line, if the Dodgers do hold on to Keibert, I think in some way, shape, or form, they're going to have to get them, at least comfortable, even if it's at first base or third base, because if the DH comes next season, which is likely, you're still going to have so many players that need to get reps in the field, and it's going to be tough not having Will Smith or Keibert Ruiz in the lineup defensively because they're both so good defensively. So hopefully, again, Will Smith, they can teach him some third base. He's able to get somewhat decent there, or who knows, maybe Keibert learns the outfield, but it's a good problem to have, but it's definitely going to be interesting moving forward, especially with Diego Cartaya. 2 or 3 years, away from probably being the best catcher of the three. So, again, the Dodgers, if they hold on to Keibert, I would assume one of those two, they have to teach them at least another position, so that way the Dodgers can figure out places to get those guys in the lineup. Max Muncy Stan, would the Nationals somehow accept a deal that doesn't involve Keibert Ruiz for Max Scherzer? I think there's a solid chance because although Max Scherzer is by far not only the best pitcher on the market, probably the best player on the trade market right now, he is likely only going to be a rental, and he does have to waive his no-trade clause, which, that could be a huge factor where, let's say there's 4 or 5 teams that are inquiring about Max Scherzer, and let's say those teams are the Dodgers, the Padres, the Giants, the Rays, and I don't know, maybe let's see here. I don't know. Let's say the Athletics. Okay, let's say the Athletics. Those are the teams that are inquiring about Max Scherzer. Well, for Max Scherzer, he might not want to go to any of those teams except for the Dodgers. So if he turns to the Nationals and says, listen, the only trade I will accept is going to the Dodgers. And if you're the Nationals at that point, he's likely not going to re-sign. You're out of playoff contention already. You want to get some sort of package for him, considering you have the worst minor league system in all of baseball at the moment. So I think there's a strong chance the Dodgers can actually do a deal that doesn't involve trading Keibert Ruiz. Now, when the Dodgers made a deal for Manny Machado 3 years ago, he was, by far the best player at the deadline, but he was only a rental, and the Dodgers, I believe they parted with 5 prospects. But I think at the time, the highest prospect they dealt with was, I think, their number 4, maybe their number 5 prospect. When the Dodgers traded for Yu Darvish back in 2017, I think Willie Calhoun was the Dodgers' number 3 prospect. Maybe he was their number 4 prospect. So I get why a lot of people are assuming that Keibert would be included in a deal for Max Scherzer, but I think there's a strong chance, again, especially considering 1, he's a rental, 2, he has to approve of the trade first. I think there's a chance that the Dodgers can get out of this without having to part ways with any of their top 2 or 3 prospects. Now, if they're able to avoid having to part with Keibert, they might have to include some more, middle tier kind of prospects where, let's say it's like Keibert, he's the leading way. Maybe you trade Keibert with like your number 16 prospect and then maybe another guy outside the top 30. But if you're able to avoid Keibert, maybe it's something like your number 4 prospect, your number 11 prospect, and then maybe like your number 28 prospect, something along those lines. I have no clue. That's just what I'm guessing, but I do think there's a chance the Dodgers can make it out without having to part ways with Keibert Ruiz, which would be an absolute, if they did that, wow, what a win that would be for the Dodgers. Jay wants to know, is Matt Beaty being included in trade packages? Hey, if teams are calling asking for Matt Beaty, you never know. Matt Beaty could actually probably be a starting outfielder for a good amount of teams across baseball, but I know he's not well liked within a lot of Dodgers fans, but the thing with Beaty is he is a fine depth piece. He's a fine pinch hitter. He's a fine guy you can plug into the outfield if you need to do a double switch or something like that. Considering the fact he's gotten so many starts just because there's been a lot of injuries, I get why people aren't really high on him, but Matt Beaty's a fine depth piece. I know I myself give him a lot of grief, but again, I don't mind having him on the bench, especially when needed for a pinch hit off the bench. Nick F., how much should the Dodgers realistically offer Chris Taylor at the end of the season? That's a great question because I myself have no idea what the market is going to be for Chris Taylor. I have gone on record saying that I think Chris Taylor, with the exception of Clayton Kershaw, just because Clayton Kershaw, I don't think he should pitch for any other team, so whatever he asks for, you got to give. But I think Chris Taylor is the most valuable and I guess the most important offseason player that the Dodgers need to do whatever they can to bring back, because not only is he fantastic with the bat, the versatility he offers in the field where he can play essentially anywhere that's needed, he's rarely ever hurt, knock on wood. So I think the Dodgers need to do whatever it takes to bring Chris Taylor back. What that contract's going to look like, I'm not certain. My guess is he's probably going to get somewhere along the lines of maybe like a 4-year deal worth, I don't know, $60 million, something like that. That's $15 million a year. Maybe something along those lines. I don't think the Dodgers are going to overpay for him. I don't think there's a way for a team to overpay for him unless someone comes out and says, like, here's 5 years for $100 million. So whatever it costs, whatever Chris Taylor's agent is asking for, I think the Dodgers need to bring him back because he is such a valuable piece. Max Muncy is the Dodgers' best hitter, probably overall their best player, but I think Chris Taylor has been the Dodgers' most valuable player, not just this season, but pretty much ever since 2017. This guy has just been a consistent player, and I think losing him, we talk about how much of an impact it's been losing Kike Hernandez, losing Jock Peterson this offseason, and if the Dodgers were to lose Chris Taylor, I just think that would be a massive loss. So we'll have to wait and see what happens in regards to that, but I think the Dodgers need to bring him back. Scoots Magoots. We were led to believe that Knebel died, but he's coming back soon. Does that mean that Brandon Morrow might have a shot to play this year also? Yeah, the Corey Knebel thing is kind of interesting because initially they were talking about him coming back end of August, early September. Now apparently he's on a rehab assignment with Oklahoma City. He said he wants to have about 5 outings before he's comfortable coming back. So expect Corey Knebel to come back maybe like August 10th, August 15th, around that range. So he definitely was, his recovery process was a lot quicker than was expected. Brandon Morrow, I don't think there's any chance we see him this year. The last we heard was about a month and a half ago, and essentially he stopped throwing the baseball because he was just feeling pain. I forget where exactly. I want to say his shoulder he was feeling pain, but don't quote me on that. And I think the Dodgers actually sent him home to pretty much recover, take his time. So if it's the end of July right now, we haven't heard any sort of update from Brandon Morrow. I just don't think there's any chance that we see him back this year, which is a drag because I was hoping that we'd see him at some point this year. I know initially the reports were we'd probably see him in the second half of the season, but yeah, I'm not going to say it's a 0% chance, but it's highly unlikely, I think, that Brandon Morrow pitches for the Dodgers this season. And we got Bob Nightingale in my DMs. Bob Nightingale, how's it going? What would Berrios plus Buxton take? It would take a whole lot because the Twins are reportedly asking for 2 top 100 prospects and an arbitration-eligible player in return just for Jose Berrios, which Berrios is a fine pitcher. He's a great starting pitcher. I think he's been to 2 All-Star games. He'd be a great number 3 option, a great number 2 option for a lot of teams. I don't think he's an ace. I don't think he's a Cy Young caliber pitcher. I get he's cheap and he's under contract through the end of next season, but what the Twins are asking for him is already high in itself. And now if you're including that's a tongue twister, Byron Buxton, that would probably cost something along the lines of Keibert Ruiz, Gavin Lux, Bobby Miller, Miguel Vargas, Andy Pages, maybe a few other players along that caliber as well, plus an arbitration eligible player. So you're including a big leaguer as well, which I guess probably maybe like Gavin Lux, something along the lines of that. But yeah, it would cost a lot. I would love to see Buxton in the outfield with Mookie Betts and Cody Bellinger. I know people are hesitant on Byron Buxton because he's always hurt, but when he's healthy, he's one of the top 25 players in the game of baseball. Defensively, he's probably the best outfielder in all of baseball as well, so I would love to see him. But that package is probably a little too high, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Nathan Nunez wants to know if we go after Max Scherzer, should we go after Brad Hand too? Initially, I posted an article actually today going over blockbuster trade packages, and initially I had Brad Hand in the trade package with the Washington Nationals where we'd get Max Scherzer, Josh Harrison, and Brad Hand. But upon further review, looking back at Hand's recent outings, I'm more on board with Daniel Hudson, who a former Dodger in 2018, who has been unreal this year for the Nationals. He was unreal back in 2019 as well, had a down year last season. He's been fantastic, striking out batters, I think 13 per 9 innings. His FIP is a career low, his WHIP is a career low. I'd honestly rather have Daniel Hudson. He's a free agent at the end of the season. So if the Dodgers want to go and get Daniel Hudson along with Max Scherzer, I'd be fine with Brad Hand. I think that'd be a great addition as well. But I think, honestly, I'm more on board with Daniel Hudson at the current moment. At Jacobs Knows, who can you say confidently from the current Dodgers big league roster can you say will be on the move at the deadline? I don't think any player on the current roster would be moved at the deadline. The only player I could see being moved would be like in a potential blockbuster deal, and that would be Gavin Lux, just because he's expendable. You can easily slide Chris Taylor into second base. Corey Seager's coming back in a week, so you don't really have to worry about Lux. The Dodgers have a lot of talent coming up in the minor league system. There are some really good free agents this offseason where if they don't bring back Corey Seager, they could sign a new shortstop, plug in Chris Taylor as your full-time second baseman. So I haven't given up on Gavin Lux completely, but in regards to being like the best option for a big leaguer, Gavin Lux, his trade value isn't what it was a couple years ago when he was the number 2 prospect in all of baseball, but he's still, 23 years old, has shown flashes of being a really good player. So if the Dodgers are going to trade a player from their big league roster, again, unless like a Matt Beatty is included in some sort of trade as some just throw-in piece, I don't foresee any big leaguer being traded. Like I said, if it's going to be anyone, it's going to be Gavin Lux. That would be my guess. Chris Taylor's burner, speaking of Chris Taylor, is a trade or movement of Austin Barnes realistic to call up Keibert Ruiz? He should absolutely not be traded. This is so tough because Keibert Ruiz is by far better than Austin Barnes. It's a tough position because the Dodgers are just absolutely loaded at the catching position where Austin Barnes is probably the best, not probably, I think he is easily the best backup catcher in all of baseball. No questions asked. Austin Barnes is still probably a top 20 catcher in all of baseball. I'd have to look more in depth on some catchers, but you could still make the case Austin Barnes is a top 15, 20 catcher in all of baseball. He doesn't hit the way we'd like him to hit, but the guy still gets on base. He's great behind the plate, has a great relationship with our pitchers, so I understand why people don't want Barnes to be up because he's blocking Keibert Ruiz. But the problem is, this was actually a question that was asked, I think it was the first question I answered in regards to Will Smith, Keibert Ruiz playing other positions. You don't want to call up Keibert Ruiz because essentially you're just going to be splitting time with him and Will Smith, where it's not fair to Will Smith to bench him 3 times a week, whereas with Austin Barnes, usually Will Smith's only being benched once or twice a week. That if Keibert was up, you'd have to bench Will Smith more, and it wouldn't be fair to Keibert to have him only, on the bench for 3-4 games a week, when in the minors he can play every day, he can consistently improve, because again, Keibert Ruiz is only 22 years old, so I don't think the Dodgers move Austin Barnes. I think he's too valuable because, again, having a really solid backup catcher is huge, especially when you got a good one in the minors waiting, because let's say something were to happen to Will Smith and you trade Austin Barnes. You have Keibert, that's great, but what do you have behind Keibert? You have nothing. Tim Fedorovich, so the Dodgers, it's smart to hold on to Austin Barnes, give Keibert Ruiz a little more time. His time will come next year when there's a DH. Maybe this offseason the Dodgers move on from Austin Barnes, but I think for the most part, Austin Barnes, I really can't see him going anywhere. Kyle Downey, what's a successful trade deadline for the Dodgers? I think a successful trade deadline is just picking up pitching of any kind. I know you can make the case the Dodgers need starting pitching more. You can also make the case they need relievers more. I just think if the Dodgers are making some sort of addition without having to dive too deep into the farm, I think that's actually the most important. For me, a successful trade deadline is keeping the farm intact. I don't want them to empty the farm for a rental that will help the Dodgers win a world championship this year, but potentially for a wild card game, one game and you're out, and all of a sudden you deplete your farm system. I wouldn't like that at all. So Andrew Friedman, he's been very smart over the years in regards to keeping the Dodgers' top prospects. Again, the best prospect he's traded has been LA's number 3, their number 4 prospect. And, aside from the whole Yordan Alvarez, Josh Fields thing, but even then, Yordan, I don't even think was a top 30 prospect in the Dodgers system. So, you live with that one. The Dodgers have held on to their prospects over the last few years. I expect them to do so, but I just really hope they don't overpay for someone. So yeah, a successful trade deadline is not overpaying and trying to keep that farm system intact. Mr. Brightside wants to know, why don't the Dodgers play small ball? A bunt on Friday night could have given us the win, and it might help win in more games. Personally, I think I've said this before on Twitter, I love small ball. I'm a fan of it. I hate that baseball is going away from small ball. I'm all for bunting against the shift, bunting guys over to get them in scoring position, stealing bases. I know nowadays that analytics pretty much say don't do that. It's not going to help your team. But there's been countless times this season where, a bunt to get a guy over into scoring position would have brought in a run, especially in extra innings. I don't understand the Dodgers' mindset in extra innings by not playing small ball. I know teams like the Padres, they thrive in it with how many bases they steal, how often they bunt. I understand the argument against it because analytically driven, it's not successful, it's not smart to do, but I love it. If I was a manager, again, if I'm bunting against the shift, it's a guaranteed single. I understand you might want to take a chance with Cody Bellinger hitting a home run, but if you bunt him over, or if you bunt, get him on first, then you could steal him, get him to second. So I know it might be a hot take that I'm a fan of small ball, but that's just me. I've always been a fan of it, but again, I understand the reason for people not necessarily really being a big fan of it. Andrew Savage would love to hear your thoughts on the remaining schedule in terms of above 500 teams and how the Dodgers have gone so far. Feels like not great against top sides so far. Yeah, the Dodgers, they've struggled against teams above 500, which is expected considering they haven't really been healthy at any point this season. Luckily for the Dodgers, their schedule in September is really easy. I don't have the teams in front of me at the moment, but they have a fairly easy schedule to close out the season. I'm not concerned with how they fare against teams above 500 because, again, come October, assuming the Dodgers are fully healthy, we'll see how they look there. It's not ideal that the Dodgers can't beat the Padres. They struggle against the Giants. They struggle against teams that are, in first place in the division. But, we saw it a few years ago when the Dodgers lost 15 games to the Diamondbacks in the regular season, and then they swept them in the postseason. So concerning a little, not ideal, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. All right, we got time for a few more questions. This question comes from Dodger Source. Do you think we need another bench bat or just a bat in general to help us out because we have a lot of injuries? So let's say someone like Jonathan Schoop. I think the Dodgers can use a bat. I talked about this in some of my previous articles for True Blue LA. I think the Dodgers should go out and acquire Chris Bryant because you could throw him in at third base, first base, any of the 3 outfield positions. He'd be fantastic there. In my article I posted today, which, by the way, go read it if you haven't already, I talked about the Dodgers acquiring Josh Harrison from the Nationals and a potential deal with Max Scherzer because Josh Harrison, he can play multiple positions, which would be great for the Dodgers. Again, we need everyone to get healthy. So once Seager's back, once Muncy's back, once Bellinger's back, once Mookie's back, once all these guys are back, you're going to go back to a bench of Albert Pujols, Zach McKinstry, Matt Beatty, guys along those lines. But I definitely think the Dodgers can use an additional bat. Again, just because they need the depth, they need more guys off the bench. And again, injuries happen. Let's say something were to happen to Mookie Betts in October. All of a sudden now you have Chris Bryant, you can plug him in. Or, some of these other names I've mentioned, you can plug them in as well. Jonathan Schoop, he's a great name. I know years ago I wanted him on the Dodgers. He kind of had a little struggles over the last few years. He's having a good season this year. I wouldn't mind him on the team, especially for some needed depth with some offense. But we'll see. Because like I said, it's tough with everyone hurt right now. But I definitely would like to see the Dodgers add an impact bat because worst case scenario, you have to bench some guys. So AJ Pollock, he might have to see the bench one extra game a week. Chris Taylor, give him some extra rest. Corey Seager, Justin Turner, give those guys extra rest moving forward. And then you can be more creative with your infield. You can put Max Muncy at second base with Cody Bellinger at first, with Chris Taylor at shortstop, or however you want to work it. The Dodgers can get creative, but I definitely think in addition to pitching, which is the top priority, adding another bat of some kind, I definitely think isn't being talked about enough, but they could definitely use at the trade deadline. And there's some really good names available. I mean, there are some really, really good names available. Well, I really wish Joey Gallo could play first or third base because I think adding Joey Gallo to the outfield would be huge, and then you could slot him in at first and third base. Maybe he'd be willing to. Maybe he'd, try it out. But I think the Dodgers adding Joey Gallo, that would be quite the move, especially considering the fact that you can likely prevent him from going to the Padres within your own division, or maybe the Giants, something like that. So we'll have to wait and see. Our final question comes from California Sports Dude. Would you be okay with dealing Diego Cartaya or Ryan Pepiot for a rental like Max Scherzer? Just really have a bad taste in my mouth with the rentals we have had. Obviously, Mookie is different. It's a tough one because Max Scherzer, there's likely a chance that he'd be a rental, but there's also a chance the Dodgers could extend him this offseason. Again, I don't know what happens with Clayton Kershaw, but there's a chance Clayton Kershaw isn't here next year. Trevor Bauer, he's likely gone next year. Dustin May, he's going to be out until probably the All-Star break. So Walker Buehler, he's a guarantee in that starting rotation. Aside from that, maybe Josiah Gray, maybe David Price, maybe Tony Gonsolin. There are a lot of question marks with the starting rotation, so I'd be on board with extending Max Scherzer. So if the Dodgers were to extend Max Scherzer, I'd be more on board with a potential trade. There's no one in the Dodgers system that I think is off limits except for Diego Cartaya. Just because this guy, he's only 19 years old. He's one of the top prospects in the Dodgers system. He's already a top 100 prospect across the board. I believe the Baseball America prospect rankings came out today, and I think Diego Cartaya was 57, 58, something along those lines. There are people that believe his comp is Salvador Perez, where people think he could be better than Salvador Perez. So if that's the case, if this guy's getting Salvador Perez comps, he's only 19, where if he's ready in 2 to 3 years and he's only 21 or 22 years old, who knows what happens with Will Smith moving forward. I think Cartaya is the one untouchable piece. So I would not be willing to part with him, even if Max Scherzer signs for 3 years after this year and you're guaranteeing that Max Scherzer stays. I wouldn't part with Cartaya. Anyone else? Keibert Ruiz, Bobby Miller, Ryan Pepiot. It'd be tough, But Max Scherzer, he does give you a chance to win the World Series this year, where I know people like to hold on to prospects, but prospects aren't a guarantee. See Gavin Lux, for example. And if you have a chance to win the World Series, you got to go for it. But the one prospect I would not want to part with would be Diego Cartaya, just because I really believe this guy, he has a chance to be better than Will Smith. He has a chance to be better than Keibert Ruiz, and he's only 19. So the fact that in 2 years from right now, he'll be 21 and he might be one of the best catchers in all of baseball, you got to hold on to him. So hopefully that answers your question, but that does wrap up this episode. Sorry I couldn't get to everyone's questions. We've been recording for about 25 minutes. Again, didn't want this to get too long. There were some questions that people asked that were already asked by someone else. So if I read their question instead of yours, my apologies. But thank you guys so much for listening. Again, stay tuned for hopefully more episodes to come in the coming weeks, the coming months. I'm going to try to be a lot better with this because I love recording podcasts. I love interacting with you guys, and the last 2 months, just a lot happened, and I went away from it. But if you haven't done so already, make sure to follow me on Twitter at Blake Harris TBLA. Again, if you're listening to this podcast, you likely already follow me, but in case for whatever reason you're not already following me, go over there, give me a follow, turn on those notifications. That way, again, you're up to date with the latest Dodgers news, but whenever I record an episode in the future, you guys can hit me up with whatever questions you guys have. You guys can listen to this episode on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just search Thinkin' Blue with Blake Harris. I might have another episode in the coming days going over more trade deadline stuff. We'll have to wait and see, so stay tuned for that. But like I said, thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate all of you guys that tuned in. I really appreciate all of you guys that follow me on Twitter. Again, it means a lot. I'm glad that you guys turn to me for all your Dodgers news, and again, I try to interact with as many of you guys as possible, whether that's in my mentions, whether that's in my DMs. I always like talking Dodgers baseball, so again, feel free to shoot me a DM, feel free to be, in my mentions, asking me anything Dodgers related. I'll try to get back to you in regards to that. But yeah, guys, again, thank you so much for listening. Again, stay tuned for more episodes. This has been Blake Harris, and I'll talk to you guys in my next podcast.